I was kind of in my office one day and I just said, I think I could be really successful here, but this is just not a business that I loved. And what I was concerned about was that, in competitive places, if you don't really have a passion for something, it's easy to get outcompeted.
If you believe we can change the narrative, if you believe we can change our communities, if you believe we can change the outcomes, then we can change the world. I'm Rob Richardson. Welcome to Disruption Now. Welcome, everybody, to Disruption Now. I'm your host and moderator, Rob Richardson. Here with me is Karim Hutson. He is an entrepreneur, a developer. We're going to hear a lot about his background. You definitely want to stay tuned. But before you do, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. We need all the disruptors to join us, to join this movement, to change narratives and constructs together. If you're listening to us on Apple, Google Play, wherever, please write us a review. That's how people get to know more about us. And we move up in the rankings so more people can learn about us. So we need your support to do that. Take a couple minutes. We really, really appreciate it. And also want to thank our sponsors, P&G, as well as Fifth Third Bank, as well as Bot Logistics. We have a lot of great sponsors that have helped us get to the point that we are now to be able to have this podcast. And now I definitely want to turn my attention to Karim Hutson, who is, as I talked about earlier, is a developer, is an entrepreneur, has been a developer in the space for about 17 years. And he's in New York, New Jersey. Pretty difficult place to be a developer. So he got a lot of good experience. What they say, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I think that statement is still true. So Karim, welcome, brother.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Rob, for doing this.
No problem, man. It's great to have you on. Let's start. How did you get started in real estate? Like, what hit you one day to say, this is what I want to do, and how'd you get into it?
Well, it's funny. I'll fast forward to when I was in General Atlantic Partners, which was a very successful venture capital firm focused on, technology. And I was kind of in my office one day and I just said, I think I could be really successful here, but this is just not a business that I loved. And what I was concerned about was that, in competitive places, if you don't really have a passion for something, it's easy to get outcompeted. And so, at that point, I knew that, I wanted to make some sort of change. I started thinking when I was in business school about, hey, what's something that I think I could utilize my skills, but something I could be passionate about that I felt like would have some connection to community, to uplifting, where I could be, just not behind a desk, but also really active in the community. And real estate was really a natural place to go. And so I tested out when I was at Harvard Business School. I was actually taking the bus down a couple of times, maybe once every other month, to the community board meetings in Harlem. And I would just listen in and listen to what was happening. I started then going to the real estate, community board meetings, and that's where they plan all the things that are happening in the community. And I ended up meeting, two Black developers who ended up being my first bosses out of business school. And from there, I just loved the business and started Genesis a year later in 2004.
So you did that right out of college? Wow. So basically
out of business school. So I was
out of business school. Okay.
So not quite out of college, but maybe like 5 or so years.
Okay. That's still pretty good. So you started Genesis. If you were talking to your younger self, knowing everything you know when you first got into development, what advice would you give your younger self and what would you ignore?
Oh, man. I think the advice I would give my younger self would be whatever you think is big, multiply it by 300 and aim for that.
Oh, wow.
And I just think, when I first started my business, I think I had big dreams. But I think, my mentors always say, think bigger. And I think as you've been in the business longer and you've seen kind of the possibilities, you kind of don't know what you don't know. And I would say, like, I wish I had, just not only aim for that grand slam, I wanted to, hit it out of the stadium and into the lake.
Right.
And
still
I
got time.
It's still got time, absolutely. And not that we haven't done well, but I think that's, as you're younger and you're thinking about what you want to do and where you want to go, I think, whatever you think is big, think about it being just bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the other thing I would tell myself is, there's a lot of pressure that, comes on you as an entrepreneur. don't think people necessarily appreciate.
Yeah, it is. It's a lonely place, and it's hard to know unless you've been there.
Exactly. And so I think you get pressure to do a lot of things in order to make sure your business works, right? And I think one of the things, especially that Black developers get pressured on, is do you have enough quote unquote capacity, liquidity, money, all the stuff that folks talk about to try to justify or really explain why you can't do the deal.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I've seen that just a little bit on that. That cut across the board. It's not just development. It's any business you're in. They assume if you're Black, then you must not have capacity. That's number one. Number two, they never ask the same question to white guys. It's like, all right, if they got capacity, or they assume they have the ability, even if they don't have the capacity to do it. It's just that, something we have to fight against it is being like small. Or they've set up these grandfather clauses, right? That's what my mother said it well, because she used to have a restaurant, and they had these. They told her at this festival that she was working to get into. They said, "Well, people are grandfathered in." She said, "My grandfather was a slave, so that means I'm never getting in." Like, what's that mean? So,
no, it's so true. And the sad thing about it is that one of my friends said it's almost like when Charlie Brown was going to kick the ball and Lucy kept moving and every time he was ready to kick it. I mean, that's kind of the definition of capacity. It's like whenever we get to where it looks like we have capacity, then they always move the ball.
Yep.
And, but I would say to that point, be careful who you align yourself with when you're trying to address what people are saying you need to address. And I think, partners are it's like marriage, right? And so you always have to be careful, who you get in bed with.
Sounds like there's a story there.
Well, there's a lot of stories. Yeah.
I hear something coming. So I feel like it's there. So I want to try to pull it out of you here. So one of the hardest lessons of being a founder is building a team and building a founder and finding a founder if it's right fit. Sounds like there's some lessons you had there in terms of founder fit. What lessons would you give current entrepreneurs out there in this space?
I would just say it's really hard, when you're out trying to figure out what you need to do a deal and you're in the hustle. You got to make sure you do all the diligence you can possibly do. And you got to make sure that, whatever folks are telling, I will say this, and this would go to the advice that I would ignore. You often get told, hey, this is your first deal, young buck, you're going to get the next one. Don't worry about this. Right. And I would say, ignore that advice, please, 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 please. Always look to strike the absolute best deal you can for yourself, and understand obviously all the pressure points. But I would say that would definitely be what I would be ignoring, because, oftentimes folks who look different than us and, have more, potential power at the table at the point in time you're in the negotiation, when they have money on the table, they're taking every dollar,
every single dollar, and then some. Like it's
they're not, and oftentimes, I actually think, they're often reading, whatever agreement you have to the detriment of, of you. And so, and that's, especially if they feel like, you're young in the business and trying to come up. So I think, you just gotta be smart. I'm not saying you gotta be angry or greedy. I would also tell a lot of young folks when they were in the business, sometimes you gotta share your concept so people can give you advice. You don't want to have your arms too closed and your hands too closed that people can't help you. Right. Yeah. But at the same time, when you have that opportunity, I think you got to swing for the fences and grab what you can grab and say, hey, this is my chance. This is what I'm doing. Here's the value that I'm adding. I want to make sure that value gets acknowledged and that I get monetary value for that. And so to me, that's important.
No, I completely agree. There's often this I think this fear about, are we overcharging? Is it too much? And that's kind of imposter syndrome. 1, 2, I really hate the mantra and that, we have to work twice as hard to get half as much. I'm like, no, I have no problem working twice as hard, but let's get twice as much. So let's have our perspective kind of change on that end. And I can tell you, right. Go ahead.
I think that's right. And what I would also say, to the best negotiators, out there, you're always looking, I learned really quickly in New York real estate that you could be negotiating what you think your value add is. And the other person on the table is typically negotiating into your pot, right? So you're like trying to get to where you think you are, and they're already where they think they are. And they're just trying to like get further into your side of the table. And so it's a different way of negotiating. And it's probably a trademark of kind of New York negotiating style.
Yeah, I mean, New York is a very aggressive place, but development is a hard place, man. Development is there's no easy business, I guess, really. But development is definitely, there's a lot of surprises that can, if you don't negotiate right, you can end up not only making as much money, you can end up losing money very easily. So talk about the importance of really being in the game. I think more of us need to be developers, more of us need to be owners, and really understand how much money is being given away in some ways, like, tax credits, other grants. Like there's money being given to do development. Nearly every development that is out here is subsidized one way or another. It is not completely paid for, but a lot of it is. It just requires some upfront capital to kind of bridge the gap. But then if you do that, you can have a lot of opportunity. If you want to, hearing people that are in development, that want to get into development, that aspire to be where you are, where should they start? Like you're in New York, obviously, but there's probably some things that rhyme everywhere. Like there's probably some basics to approach when it comes to development.
Yeah, listen, I would say this about the importance of ownership, which I think you hit on the exact point. And, I just recently wrote an op-ed in Impact Alpha. One of the things I was talking about was the fact that, the CRA tried to set up home ownership, right, for low income folks, or opportunity for housing for low income folks. But
and for Black people specifically, to prevent redlining specifically.
Right. Well, that's what they failed to talk about specifically, just low income. But so that's one of the things I talk about, is that there needs to be a mention of Black and brown. But even on top of that, I think what's important is that we understand that there is a tremendous opportunity, and there's a tremendous, I think, obligation, especially for Black and brown communities, to be entrepreneurs and to be owners, right? Especially in the real estate realm, right? And so, I would say, I think for low-income housing tax credits, which is a large way that deals that are affordable are being financed, I think there are probably 2 or 3%, I would gather, of those firms are owned and controlled by Black and brown people. But those developments are built for tenants that are probably 70+%. I think the number is 67%, Black and brown. And so we can't replicate the situation where, we are providing land to firms that are not controlled by Black and brown folks and entrepreneurs. They're not given the opportunity to contribute to those communities in a meaningful way as owners, right, on a mass scale. However, they're being owned, right, but folks who are living in them don't look like those owners. And I do think it makes a difference. I'm very proud of the fact that, my firm is hiring a lot of Black and brown folks to work there, that we're controlling and making decisions as Black and brown folks, as women, as Black women in this company, and also that we're going out to hire folks, whether they're architects or engineers that are Black and brown. And even on top of that, that I think there's an argument to be made that we're thinking about the communities differently. Every morning, I live close to a lot of the buildings that, I own in Harlem. And I walk my kids to the bus stop, and they see the buildings, they see the tenants that are there. And, if there's something on the street that my 8-year-old doesn't like, she'll say, "Daddy, how come this looks like that?" Right. And so there's an investment in that community that's really strong. But the same when I go to Jersey City, or when I'm going to East Orange or other places, and those communities are looking like me, that there's an investment, there's an understanding of how those work, what the issues are, and how to think about an ownership from a holistic standpoint, right? I don't just, we need more subsidy to build affordable housing, but what am I going to be doing to really promote these families to a place where they're sufficient, where they can move up the latter, right?
Yeah.
Those are things that we're trying to think about and solve, as I think Black developers in these communities, and not as statistics, but folks who we're sitting there going to church with. So folks who we know, who we know every day when we're going to the grocery store and we see them. So to me, that's important. And that's why we really got to promote Black entrepreneurs on the real estate level. So
Yeah.
and I think, starting, I always tell folks, listen, get low, get small from the extent of understanding what's happening at the local level, understand what's happening in the communities that you're interested in trying to develop. And then think big in terms of the opportunities, just like I said in my point, right? Don't just say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to go get this small building and start small. A lot of people give advice, hey, start small, start small. In real estate, I think it's the opposite. You go as big as you could possibly get, and you try to go for it and be smart and hire a great team around, try to get the work done. And I think that usually results in good results.
No, I agree. I want to talk about ownership a little bit more. When you look at all across the country, you're seeing traditionally Black communities, some upper middle class communities, kind of being lost, right? There's communities in LA. Harlem might be, I'm sure there's some examples of Harlem too, where there was this concentration of a lot of Black professionals. Grandma had the house. All of a sudden, somebody offered a bunch of cash and gave away the house for the cash, thinking that, that was the better deal. What's your thought on us making sure that we keep grandma's house, leverage that for future opportunities versus just getting the quick cash? My feeling on it is that we need to hold on more to our property, because that's how we, A, we should just do that. But B, that's how you really accumulate wealth, because it builds as you have property. That's how you can leverage that to do things like you're doing, like actually do development versus just taking $1 million. I know people probably never seen money like that before, but if someone offers you $1 million for your house, that means it's worth a whole lot more.
Yeah. It's funny. My wife and I are looking at buying a brownstone up in Harlem right now, kind of trading, kind of what we're living in now. And, there was a for sale sign that just had a little number, and we're thinking, oh, that's weird, because, we didn't see like a broker there or anything. And so we called and picked the phone, made an appointment. There was an older Black guy who, and his wife was there, and they took us all up and down. And he told the story about how when he first got the property, there was a Black man who owned it, and he bought it from him. And he said, when I shook hands with that guy, I didn't have the money, but that guy was committed to seeing me buy that property.
Yeah.
And he said, I have that same commitment now as I'm selling. To try to figure out if I can, move another Black family in there because of what you said. I want to see that ownership chain continue. He said, look, I've done my course. I've done what I can do. I'm ready to move on. But if I can sell it to somebody, in the community, I would like to do that. So I think those stories are happening a lot, in the Black community. It's not that I think folks are saying, hey, we don't want white folks here in the community. I think what they're saying. No,
it's about maintaining our wealth and ownership and maintaining our history too. These are historic places, Ladera, all these places have a lot of rich history of Black excellence. And it's about maintaining the culture and respecting the history and also leveraging the wealth too. That's really what it's about, because these properties are worth a lot of money. That's it. I mean, that situation I appreciate. I was also more speaking to people that inherit the property.
Yes.
And then just give it away for a lot of money. That's not a good deal. It feels like it is, but long term, just literally borrow the money and then make some more money off of the house. Don't give away grandma's property. Stop it. Just tell people like it. I mean, there are some extreme situations where people are desperate. That's usually not the situation. The situation is, wow, it's a lot of money. I've never seen that much money. And I get it. But that's part of us, I think, some of us not having the understanding of how money actually works and compounds. It's not, and you spend it, it's gone versus sitting and letting it grow.
Well, I think that's the real point. It's like, what are you going to do with that money when you're selling? Look, if you're investing into a business where you're going to try to create something of value, then that's a fantastic investment. But I think the major point here is that, the understanding of how money works, how we can put money to work more effectively, in our personal lives, to me is a huge, huge story, right? And that's something that we
because just think right now, just to interrupt your point really quick. Right now, if you had the value of a house that was totally paid off, money is super cheap right now.
Yeah.
You had that, right? You had that right now. You can easily keep that property, right? Let's say you sold it, like somebody want to sell it for $1 million. Instead, you keep it. You no longer have a mortgage, but they pay like you still have a mortgage. So you pay for that. One, two, then you borrow money on top of that, which is not taxable, to then get another piece of property to add income. Three, you use the value to depreciate to actually reduce your income tax. So there is no I didn't learn this stuff until recently. I'm like, oh, this is why people keep property. Not only can you make money, it also helps reduce your taxes a lot. So there's getting rid of the property, generally speaking, is a bad move.
And think about that when you're an entrepreneur in real estate, as opposed to just a homeowner, and multiply that value and those savings. And that's why that proposition of Black folks owning and becoming mass owners on an entrepreneurial scale in real estate is so important for exactly that reason.
No, I agree. I kept my own property and moved into this property that we have now. We moved here, but I kept the old property and I've rented it out. I'm like, and it's saved a bunch on taxes and they paid the mortgage. I'm like, this is the life. I have to do this a little bit more. I'm starting to understand why people do this. So I had to get a few more properties on this, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also say that, a lot of folks, I do warn people, and this is not to counter your point, but I always want people to say, listen, if you're going to be a property owner and that's what you want to do, right? Even if it's a side business, make sure that you take into account everything that it takes to manage the property.
Oh, yeah, it does take some time. You got to set aside some money too.
Right. You got to set aside some money. That's called reserves, right? Because I think a lot of folks don't think about those things and they quickly get over their head and then they get into a situation, well, I got to sell because I got to get out of this situation,
exactly.
Right? That creates the problem. So I think you got to be smart, regardless of whether you're keeping it in real estate, putting it in your business, figuring out another way to utilize your savings, investing in the market. You got to be smart with your money and think thoroughly about what you're doing.
No, I agree. But again, what's originally taught to us is that you go out, you get a good job, you have just enough to pay your mortgage, and that is success. And I'm not saying that's not successful, but we need to think on a higher level now. We need to think about generational wealth, not just making enough to make ends meet, not just getting there, but actually excelling and then providing a path so the next generation behind us doesn't have to struggle in the same way. They get a head start. People look at there's this false story that's told often in America, and that people pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I'm sure there are some. That's not the normal story. The normal story is Jeff Bezos, who's a very smart man, brilliant. I'm not saying he's not brilliant, but his parents gave him $300,000 like 25 years ago to start a company. Right. Bill Gates, other people, like these people had a privileged life to get to the level of status that they did, generally speaking. And so, yes, you can definitely make it without any of that, but you have a much stronger chance if you have a support system and you don't have to go through some of the struggles that most of us do. So we do have to think not just in this generation, but the next.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, look, the story of wealth generation, right, in America has been the story of home ownership over time, right, which is exactly what you're talking about. And the fact that, goes back to the CRA Act, that, we were legislatively, not allowed to get the benefits of home ownership. Like all the LBJ New Deal stuff sounded great, but when it got down to the local level to administer those programs, they typically have provisions which stopped African Americans from being able to participate in them. And so we lost out on all the post-World War, home ownership benefits. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's one of the reasons why, when we look at ourselves as entrepreneurs today, we are in that capital crunch, right? And we're forced to do stuff to try to solve it that may not always be the wisest because we're trying to get that done. And so that's the legacy. And I think the question now is, how do we solve it, right? Part of it is recognize what the issue is, take it face on and say, hey, this is a problem. We've got to figure out a way to deal with it. Let's do it. Let's do it wisely, and let's do it directly, and not hide behind what the real issues are.
No, I agree, and it requires us working together too,
Yes.
investing together, trusting each other enough to not believe the narrative that have been put out about Black businesses, because we are sometimes guilty of that too, right?
Yeah.
And then being able to work and not working together means investing too. It means giving some dollars at some point. So like I've learned this. I ran for office, and it was still an education to get a lot of Black folks to understand. Yes, I'm glad you're voting for me, but we also need money. Like we need money. You need money to win anything. You need money to run a business. You need money to win an election. And we have this idealistic point of view, like, well, everything should be grassroots. And yes, it should, but it's not, right? So like it takes money to have impact no matter what. And if you want to have someone that, believes in the things you believe in, then yes, it takes multiple levels of participation. Everybody can't. Most people say they're going to go out there and do grassroots. Most people aren't out there handing out leaflets on Sunday, like for real.
Right.
So like, if you can't do that, get $50, right? And then if you want to support a business, go out and find a Black business to support. There are tons now. There are funds you can give to. My friend Matt Conwell, he has his own rare breed ventures. You can donate to him. You can donate to Monique Isla Mosley. She has her own as well. Rain Ventures. You can do that from the LPN. You can participate as an angel. Then you can participate on real estate deals that you guys have. I mean, what I'm saying is we have to begin to trust each other with our capital too, just like we trust others, because that's how we're gonna rise. The Jewish community, that's what they do, and I commend them for it. That's what they should do. We should do the same thing.
I agree. And I always talk to Black businesses that we've got to reinvest, make sure we're reinvesting back in the community, that we're hiring smartly, that we're looking for opportunities to promote, other Black businesses, and that we're participating monetarily and from community service, in the community. So the community doesn't forget how important it is for that asset, for that Black business to be there, right?
Exactly.
So it's because oftentimes I have to, to go around and remind folks, because they're saying, they'll come and say, well, what's the difference between you doing it or somebody else, right? And they can say that at different levels of business. And we want to make sure they're not saying that they understand, see, hey, we're here, we're part of this community, we care about what's happening. And then by definition and by force, we're forcing everybody else who may not look like us to also be responsible, because they got to compete with us and the things that we're doing in the business. So we're pushing, the effort to be responsive to the community forward in a fast pace.
Absolutely. Let's ask a couple of our lightning round questions I like to ask. So can you think of a time that you failed, had a setback, and you learned or pivoted from that?
Can I think of a time? Sure.
Or the time that thinks out, whatever sticks out in your brain the most, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear the details of that.
Oh, man.
There's something there. See, I can tell. Just go ahead. Just come on, bring it out.
So a time that I failed and I pivot, and how I pivoted from that,
or you learned from it, or it made you better. I mean, it's a pretty wide question, but a time you failed, had a setback, and how you learned or grew from it.
I would say the toughest time, I think, from a business standpoint, was when I kind of had a tough time with one of my first investors. And I would say that I learned a lot quickly that I didn't know about how the world works, how the litigation world works, how a bunch of things work. And I would say,
choose your investors wisely, brother. Choose them wisely.
I would say that, we were able to pivot from that because we had a lot of strong institutional support from folks who believed in our mission. And I would say just Black institutions, white institutions who supported us and supported what we were doing. And so I learned a lesson, not only that you have to choose your investors very, very, very wisely, but, this is a journey, and there's ups and downs, and there's twists in the road. And that's all part of what happens in life. I remember one of my mentors, Don Peebles called me when some stuff was happening, and he just said, you know what, keep your head up, remember who you are, and don't worry about what other folks are saying. Be aggressive and keep moving forward. And it was some of the best advice that I had gotten. And so we plowed through that. We actually ended up securing an equity investment from three huge institutions: Ford Foundation, True Fund, and Morgan Stanley, that more than made up for what that person had done. And so we've been up and running and moving forward ever since. And
yeah,
I think
a good statement. I interrupt you, just made me think of something. A good statement I heard today is that everything, when you're in the middle, everything looks like failure, right?
Yeah.
So when you're in the middle of this drama with that investor, it feels like failure. I have had so many points in my public service career and my entrepreneurial career now that you're in the middle of the grind, you're in the middle of the grit, and it looks like failure, but it's not. It's just a process.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right. And you learn so much from it because you see things that, this person had much more experience and had much more developed strategies than I had known on how to deal with simple things, and showed me a lot about aspects of business that I thought I had known. And
so it made you sharper, even though it's pain in the ass. It made you sharper.
It made me sharper, that's for sure. But I think just staying out and knowing who you are, and look, I have a business plan and it makes sense, and I know that I'm doing it wisely and earnestly and fairly, and that's at the end of the day what keeps you going.
All right. Final couple questions. So you have a committee of 3, living or dead, to advise you on life, business. Again, they can be living, they cannot be with us any point in time. Who are these people and why?
Oh man, that's a good one. You know what? I'm gonna say Sam Cooke.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Jimmy Carter.
Okay, Sam Cooke, Jimmy Carter, and who else we got? I want to know why each one of these.
I thought I was going to just be able to say the names.
I said and why. So tell me about Sam Cooke. Why Sam Cooke?
I watched a documentary on Netflix about his life, and I had to admit, I knew his music from my parents, but what really inspired me about him was how he pushed he pushed the line on ownership when it came to musicians and the production of Black music, right? Really supporting, ownership from that perspective. And so I thought that was really inspiring. And I thought it was also, I understood the difficulty of trying to be in two different worlds, right? You've got a world where you feel like you have to be an image that maybe you're not, right? So you have to live this image that white America had of him, but still feeling that urge to speak out, right, in a way that you feel like you need to as African American against injustice.
Every socially conscious Black man can understand that position.
Right. And so I really appreciated that. And so I feel that's why I say Sam Cooke.
Jimmy Carter's I don't hear people mention him as a president that they would listen. Why Jimmy Carter? Tell me why. I'd like to hear this.
I just feel like the way he's lived his life post-presidency is inspiring. I think, taking on the Israeli-Palestine struggle and speaking out about it, and whether you agree with him or not, I thought was really courageous. So I would say, I would. So that's why I would mention him. And then this is going to sound probably normal, but I'll probably say Martin Luther King.
Okay.
I think his passion, his ability to speak out on issues. I think to be a change agent, right, to me, is how I kind of think of myself as a developer. Like, I want to be successful. I want to do great things in the community. I want to be a good business person. But I also want to be a change agent, right, and affect change in a real way. And so to me, that's why I would include him.
That's awesome. All right, final question. You have a billboard or maybe a Google ad to be a little more 21st century that says your theme or your saying for life. What does that say and why?
life is a journey. Stay focused.
I think that's pretty obvious about why you got to stay focused. So, yeah, stay focused, stay focused. Karim Hutson, brother, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Definitely look forward to having you stay in touch, to be a part of the Disruption Now Network. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.